Hey y'all, in this video I wanted to talk you through sort of the central learning in the class, or in other words, what I think you should be doing to be successful. This class is a little different in that you're working on understanding theories. Typically in a face-to-face environment, a lot of what we would do would be in-class discussion. Since we can't do that in the same way, I've designed the class in a way that I hope will let you get a similar experience without forcing you to do more work than is necessary. So, after you check out the syllabus and introduce yourself, then there's this module. And the video I'm recording now is probably going to go right here. So you can watch how to communicate with me. You can watch understanding the grades page. Those are important. Then there's going to be another video right here, which is this video. And then the files below understanding the grades page are my attempt to try to outline or explain how I think you should go about doing the work in the class. And so I would take some time looking these over. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the CCQs. Depending on y'all's reaction to these documents, I may or may not create videos explaining them further. But um, I guess the big picture is for each chapter, what you're trying to do is understand the theories of the chapter. Each chapter, you're going to read about 3 or 4 communication theories related to the topic of the chapter. And so, one of your goals is to understand that theory, to know the parts, to be able to explain how the theory works. And then the other goal is to be able to apply that theory to understand a problem. So at the end of every chapter, there are case studies. And so the exams in the end will have 2 chapters and then an exam. In the end, what you're going to be required to do is to explain the theory as if you're writing for a reader who has not taken the class, is not me, but is interested in communication theory on the particular case. So, in writing the exams, you're going to write a section that explains the theory, and then you're going to use that section to analyze the case and write a section that answers the question by analyzing the case. So, you're going to have to understand the theory and be able to apply it. And what I've given you here is an explanation of how I think you should go about doing that. So, if you're an excellent student, you might want to check this out to glean whatever you can from it. If you're not quite there to excellence yet, this might be a big help to you. Okay, so let's go through these one by one. The first one is called Reading the Chapters, and this is a step-by-step set of instructions for what I think you should do every Monday. Every Monday, you're going to start reading a chapter for the class, and as you start to read the chapter, I would follow these steps. These are pretty straightforward steps. Basically, you start out by getting prepared and figuring out what you're supposed to read, and then you kind of scan the thing that you're reading to see where it starts and ends, kind of how it's set up organizationally. And then you do what I call marking it up. Some people call this annotation, but in high school, especially if you took honors or AP classes, you probably learned a technique of annotation that may or may not work for you, and this might not be it. So that's why I'm not calling it annotation. But essentially, you're going to write in the book. You can use a pencil and then go back later if you want and erase it so you can sell the book. But in any event, these are some suggestions for how to mark up a chapter. Then, once you've read the chapter, the next step, which is something you may or may not have been introduced to before, is you make a set of reading notes, which is essentially taking everything you marked up in step 3 and then condensing it and handwriting a set of notes that just hit the key points that you've identified in step 3. And so that's my suggestion for reading. So if you just sit down and read the chapters like you would read a novel, that's not going to help you prepare for the quizzes or the exams. You really need to dig into these chapters, break them down, and figure them out. Okay, so let's say you feel like you're ready. You've read the chapter, you've got your reading notes, you're ready to move on. But the next step in the order of the things we're looking at here is writing exams. And I put this after the reading suggestions because the quizzes and the discussions are sort of intermediate step to get you ready for the exam. And I think understanding what the exam is going to require will help you think about the quizzes and discussions more strategically. As I've already said, this document starts out basically saying that you are going to prove that you understand the theories, and you're going to try to prove that you can use the theory to analyze the case. That's the point of the exams. And so in this document, I explain how to write the exams. And this may be a system you're not familiar with because you may or may not have taken exams like this before. But essentially, what you're going to do is look at each exam question, figure out what theory or piece of a theory applies for that question, and then write sort of a brief section, a paragraph explaining the concept. So let's say that you're going to use, maybe the question asks you to use the elaboration likelihood model. That's a theory of persuasion, and we're going to study about that in chapter 7, I think. So the first thing you would do, once you've identified that the exam is asking you to use the elaboration model, is you would write a paragraph pulling out all the important stuff that explains the elaboration likelihood model. And if you think about it, the reading notes will have really prepared you to do this because you've already pulled out the important pieces that explain the concepts. Then you're going to look at the case and figure out, how can I answer this question using this theory? And essentially, you're going to write an answer that sort of links the theory to the case and then gives evidence from the case to answer the question. So the elaboration likelihood model, there are two routes you can use to persuade somebody. And so if you're identifying one route, then you would give evidence from the case to prove that route was being used. And then finally, you're going to finalize the answer by writing a thesis statement for the beginning, write a conclusion that goes at the end. You put the stuff you've already written between those two, and then you rise for content, grammar, and citation style. You might want to have somebody else proofread your exam questions, and you might consider going to the writing center because I will be grading your writing as well as the content of your answers. So here's an example where I kind of go through and explain this process in more detail. I'm not going to talk through this, but I think if you read through it and look at the case study for chapter 1, you can kind of figure out how this works. Okay, so now you've got some tips for how to do the reading, and you can see at the end of this process for each set of chapters what kind of work you're going to have to do, where you're going to have to connect the theory to the case and answer questions. Now, the middle part is the quizzes. And so here are some tips for taking the quizzes. The quizzes are essentially, okay, so maybe the easiest way to explain this is to explain what the quizzes have replaced. I'm actually in Las Vegas for our meetings before the semester starts. In the hotel, it looks like the wireless is struggling a little bit. Hopefully it'll open. If not, I'll have to open it off the computer. But what I used to do in previous semesters teaching this class online is for each chapter I would have you answer questions about the case study, and you would write them as if they were essay answers. So each week students would write, okay, here we go. Each week students would write essentially half of an essay. I would give them feedback on it, critique their answers, clarify points. Then they would do another chapter, write a second half of an exam, essentially, which is really good practice, obviously. And then the actual exam would be a different case looking at the same theories. So it was very time consuming, and there was a lot of writing that I wanted to see if we could cut some of the work out but still be as effective in your learning. So these quizzes are essentially the case study questions, but I've put them into multiple choice answers. So instead of asking you what are the 5 concepts that make up education, entertainment, television, and then having you write a little essay about it, I'm asking you a quiz question, and then you have a multiple choice, multiple answers to pick from. And then what happens is, and I'm not sure if I'm going to make a video to show you this or not. When you take the quiz, you will just see the question and the possible answers. You're going to take the quiz, submit your answers, and then the explanations for the answers become available on Monday night at midnight, essentially. So the quiz is due by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Let's say you submit it at 11:59. If you wait 2 minutes until 12:01 a.m. on Monday, then you'll be able to see the answers. And the answers will give you a full written out explanation of the theory and the analysis of the case. So you should be able to see, if you didn't get the question right, what was the problem. And if you did get the question right on accident, you'll get to see what the reasoning behind the correct answer is. Okay, so to prepare to take the quizzes, you need to do the reading, as I've explained. I think you probably need to allocate at least an hour, maybe more, and we'll kind of play with this. But the quiz is open. There's no time limit. Once you open it, you can keep it open for as long as you want. But obviously, the problem with that is if you lose your internet connection, then the quiz will close. So you need to be able to do this in one sitting, and we'll work out how that works later. But what I would do before you open the quiz, do your chapter reading, look over the case study, and then try to answer the questions at the end of the case study, because most of the questions that I ask in the quiz are kind of taken or modified from the book's questions about the case study. So if you feel like you can answer those questions pretty well, then you should be looking good for the quiz. Also, before you open the quiz, ask any questions you have in the CCQ. So if you're trying to answer one of the questions about the case study but you're not sure, you can ask about it in the CCQs. I'll give you feedback. Once you open the quiz, essentially what you're going to do is see the question, see the answer options, and then you're going to have to kind of toggle back and forth between the theory or concept and the case study to figure out the answer to the question. And the other thing I suggest you do, as you're working towards your answer, or maybe once you've decided on an answer, just kind of make some notes. What theory or concept did I use to decide on this answer? What evidence from the case study did I decide was useful to answer the question? Maybe why do you think some of the options are wrong? Sometimes an option has nothing to do with anything, and it's easy to say that that one's definitely not the correct one. Or do you think maybe there was more than one good answer to the question? Answer each question and save your work, submit the quiz, and I think you'll see the score you got. Then at 12:01 a.m. on Monday night, you will see the answers and the explanations. As you look back to see, okay, did I miss this question? Then you need to look and see, okay, why did I think it was A? And why does Steve say it was B? And you'll have to kind of look back at the theory, look back at the evidence, look back at your notes about your answer choice, and decide, do you think the explanation is correct and you just got it wrong and now you understand? That's good. Do you think your answer was a good answer despite what you've read from me? And that's fine too. Do you think that the question or answer choices were unclear? I definitely want to hear if you think that. You're welcome to ask any questions or give any comments about the question, the answer choices, the correct answer, or the explanation. And then you can challenge any wrong answer for really any reason, but what you're doing is persuading me that your answer should be considered correct for one reason or another. And so in your challenge, you're going to do that in the quiz comment section. And you're going to write in as much detail why you think your answer should be considered correct. I'm open to pretty much any reasoning you can give, but keep in mind, just because you challenge doesn't mean you're going to get points back. So you have to have a good argument as to why your answer should be considered correct. And I'll consider pretty much any argument you make, and then I'll respond in the comments. Okay, so that's a big part of the class. The quizzes and the exams are a big part of the class. And then the last thing I want to show you, I'm not going to talk through these in much detail, is the discussions. So the discussions are another important part of the class. I think there's 175 points worth of discussions, and this is where you really get to kind of talk amongst yourselves, and I'll jump in at times about the case studies and the theories. So this is just something that I adapted slightly from the source you see there, and it essentially gives you some ideas about how to write your discussion posts. It's pretty straightforward: planning, preparing, and then writing and revising. And then the other thing is replying to discussions. So students oftentimes have something interesting to say in their own discussion post, but then when you have to reply to two classmates, a lot of times it's just, oh yeah, I agree, that's a good point. And that's not what we're looking for. So in this document, which I modified from the Lehigh link here, it gives you some really good ways to think about replying. And probably a couple of things. First, in your reply, you want to keep the discussion going and add value to the conversation. So when somebody says, I think X, when you're going to respond to them, you not only want to respond, but you also want to add something new or interesting. And so they give you a bunch of ideas for responding. You can agree, you can ask a question, you can enhance their answer, you can answer a question they asked, you can build on what they said, you can disagree with what they said. There's a bunch of strategies here. So I don't want a bunch of, oh yeah, that was a good idea. And so I think it would be fun maybe some weeks to just say, I'm going to disagree with people and see if I can get people to see a different side of this issue. But these resources, I think these resources are really going to be the key to you being successful. So if you can, this week, I would take some serious time to look these over and really try to implement them as quick as you can. I'm going to be giving you a bunch of feedback, and you can see the first quiz and discussion isn't due till September 10th. So you've got some time to dig into this stuff. As always, if you have any questions, ask me in CCQs, and I'll be talking to you more later.